Well, today we continue this series on our seven deadly sins, the seven slightly irksome irritations. And as I was getting into this, I was like, what was I thinking last summer as I was planning this, making this the second sin that I would talk about? At the beginning of the week, I was realizing that it had been a couple of years since I had talked about sex here in the church before, which seemed like a long time, but the more I got into it this week, the more I realized it was nowhere near long enough. Because it's a tough subject. I mean, it's confusing at the best of times, it's awkward, it's tender. It's a tender issue for a lot of us. And it certainly doesn't help that the church has been a little bit schizophrenic when it has come to this subject of sex and sexuality and desire and lust. I can't think of any other topic in the Bible that has passages as divergent as these two I'm about to read to you. First one is from Song of Solomon. You all know Song of Solomon. Traditionally, it was supposed to be a love letter that was written from King Solomon to his bride Shulamite on the night that their wedding night, the night that they were married. And the reason that it's in the Bible is because we also see it as a metaphor for God's love to us. And really interesting, I feel like I need to do one of those disclaimers like you see on TV. Due to mature content and strong sexual graphic material, viewer discretion is advised. But just listen carefully to the Word of God. How beautiful you are, my love. How very beautiful. Your eyes are doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats moving down the slopes of Gilead. Now, another disclaimer I feel like I need to make is that not all of the imagery from the Old Testament times completely translates into West Side Los Angeles in the 21st century, but I'm pretty sure that was supposed to be a compliment. Your teeth are like a flock of shorn ewes that have come up from the washing, all of which has its twin, and not one among them is bereaved. So basically he's saying, look at you, you have all of your teeth. Your lips are like a crimson thread and your mouth is lovely. Your cheeks are like halves of a pomegranate, behind your veil. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built in courses. On it hang 1,000 bucklers, all of them shields of warriors. I don't know if she has scales on her neck or what's going on. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle that feed among the lilies. Until the day breathes and the shadows flee, I will hasten to the mountain of myrrh and the hill of frankincense. You are altogether beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you. And then she responds to him, and you have to hold your seats for this. Awake, O north wind, and come, O south wind. Blow upon my garden, that its fragrance may be wafted abroad. Let my beloved come to his garden and eat its choicest fruits. Can I just say that Danielle Steele and 50 Shades of Grey has nothing over the Bible? But now take in contrast a passage like this and then this passage from the Gospel of Matthew. You've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. Let's not tell that to our teenage boys. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. I've always felt that the church has had this sort of schizophrenic view of our sexuality. When I was doing youth ministry, it drove me crazy that the traditional stance of the church had basically always been that sex is a dirty, nasty thing that you should save for the one that you really love. In the medieval times, the church would ask people, they would implore people to abstain from sexual relations every Thursday in honor of the Last Supper and every Friday in honor of the crucifixion. They would ask people not to have sex on Saturdays for the sake of the Virgin Mary, on Sundays because of the resurrection, and on Mondays for the sake of the poor souls in purgatory. You know, when you really stop to think about it, if they had just a couple more days, none of us would be here, right? And so we've got the church on the one hand, and we've got the world that's telling us that sex is just a natural, biological phenomenon. It's just an action. It doesn't really mean all that much. We kind of pick it up in 1,000 little ways, but none more so than the language we use for sex. What do we say? We're having sex. It makes it sound like a very casual commodity that we can possess and own, kind of like an item at the hometown buffet. You're passing through, oh yeah, that sex looks particularly good today. I'll have some of that, please. Or what else do we say? We say doing it, right? Now that's a really romantic expression, isn't it? It brings out the most sort of base biological, animalistic expression of our sex, as if sex is only sex, but don't we all know that that's just not true? It's not just bodies and tissue and nerve endings. Sex is not just sex. There's a story of a young man who's graduating from college, and he and his girlfriend are not quite ready to get married, but they don't want to go their separate ways, so they decide they're going to move in together. And the young man is telling his dad, and his dad is very troubled by this and trying to talk him out of it. And the young man says, look, Dad, it's really no big deal. We'll get an apartment, we'll try it out. If it doesn't work, we'll split. And his dad says in a very calm and loving voice, my son, people don't split, they tear. C.S. Lewis put it this way. He said, as much as we'd like to avoid it, the simple truth of our humanity is that every time a man and a woman lie together, there is a spiritual, an existential relationship set up between them that at the end of the day either has to be eternally enjoyed or eternally endured. How true is that? The word that the Bible uses for sex is the word yada. It's the word to know. And it's used over 500 times in the Old Testament, not only for sex, but for all sorts of really deep, covenantal, intimate kind of knowing. If you are a real student of something, if you're a real disciple of something and you study it completely, that is the term yada. We Protestants have always been very vocal about the fact that sex is not just for procreation. It's not, the whole purpose of sex is not just to make babies. The first commandment in the Bible, so many of us think that it's to have no other gods before God, and that is the first commandment of the 10 Commandments, but it's not the first commandment of the Bible. The rabbis actually plotted out all 613 commands that God gives to God's people throughout the Torah alone. And the very first commandment that God gives, do you remember what it is? It's to have sex, right? And don't you remember? Go forth and multiply. Be fruitful and multiply. Basically, God's saying, go have sex. And then the moment that Eve is made, the very next thing that God says is, for this reason, a man shall leave his mother and a woman leave her home, and they should travel on and become what? One flesh. We Protestants have always been the champions of birth control because we don't believe that sex is just for making babies. We believe that there's something about sex that was created to be a glue, a cement that bonds people together, that brings people together in intimacy, that builds relationships, that this is a part of why it was created in the first place. I had a counselor who said that good marriages aren't made by sex, but good marriages are held together. It's the cement that holds a good marriage together. So, one of the things that we need to understand is it's not just sex itself, which was created to be a good thing by God, but the yearning and the desire for sex as well. There is this thing that's been put inside of us this longing and yearning for a deep, unconditional kind of love, a real yada, a thorough kind of knowing, a knowing someone inside and out that speaks to us of a more eternal kind of love, something that gives us a glimpse. It's like our romantic love, our passionate sexual romantic love gives us a glimpse into a deeper, unconditional, eternal love that's available only in God. We see it all the time in popular culture. I remember when I was growing up, Dan Fogelberg had that great song. Do you all remember Longer? Longer than there have been fishes in the ocean, higher than any bird ever flew, longer than there have been stars up in the heavens. I have been in love. I've been in love with you. And when you think about it, I mean, it's ridiculous. There's obviously no two human beings who have loved each other since before the stars were in the heaven. What is that? That is this glimpse, this metaphor that we have in our romantic love for the eternal love of God, the Creator. And so, in that sense, even though we Protestants say that there are only two sacraments, baptism and the Lord's Supper, we call sacraments a visible sign of an invisible grace. In that sense, sex and the desire for sex is a sacrament. I think what we forget sometimes is that when we have sex, we're not just putting our hands on a body, we are putting our hands on a soul. That's why people who are abused at the age of 10 still carry that pain and that devastation in 20, 40, 60 years later, because we can so easily forget that when you touch someone's body, you're really touching their soul as well. Because sex is not just sex. 2 years ago, when we were doing our series on idolatry, we said that idols, the things that become idols, are not usually bad things. In fact, they're usually good things, sometimes very good things that we just turn into ultimate things. That an idol becomes an idol when we turn to it to give us the things that only God should be able to give us. And that the real irony about an idol is that when we take that good thing and we twist it or we tweak it or we make it an ultimate thing for ourselves, then the reality is, which is the total paradox and irony of idols, is that it starts to give us less and less and take more and more until it gives us nothing and has taken everything. The thing that's crazy about idols is that they actually take away from us the very thing that we turn to them to try to get in the first place. Does that make sense? And I don't know if I see that definition of idolatry any more complete than in any of the other sins, of these 7 deadly sins, than in the sin of lust. Our sex, our desire for sex, our yearning for sex is a God-given, precious, sacred gift that is created to try to draw us toward people, right? To try to get us to move towards somebody, to get to really know somebody, to become intimate with somebody, to become one with somebody, to get to know people on that deepest level. And yet, the crazy thing is when we tweak it, when we twist it, when we turn love into lust, when we turn desire into lust, it actually ends up cutting us off from the very people that it was designed to draw us closer to. We certainly see it in pornography, don't we? This epidemic that we see all over the world right now. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. I heard a story about a young man named Ken who went off to college as a freshman. He was a little bit shy and awkward, not the best-looking guy, not super popular. His roommate, on the other hand, was one of the most popular guys on campus. He was out all the time at parties and gatherings with friends, dating girls, everything that Ken wished that he could do. But while his roommate was out, he would just be left alone, lonely in his room, wishing he could go out and connect with people. And before long, he discovers that just a few clicks away on his computer, there are these exciting images that can give him a temporary rush and take away some of the edge off of his loneliness. And you would think, on one hand, that maybe that's not that big a deal. No one's getting hurt, are they? The reality is everybody is getting hurt. First of all, the girls that he's looking at, these are not just fantasy objects. These are real little girls all over the world. Who would have thought in the 1960s, when Hugh Hefner and Playboy seemed so cool and so sophisticated, that just a few years later there'd be this epidemic of really hardcore porn all around the world. It was bringing into prostitution and exploiting currently what they estimate 2 million young girls in Latin America, Africa, and Asia alone. As people pay to see these images and then book their child sex tourism trip to go and try to make these fantasies become a reality. But it's not just the girls that it's hurting, because Ken is also being hurt. Ken just withdraws more and more, right? As he spends more and more time in his room and less time going out and meeting people and being with people. He feels like there's this sort of intimacy that's happening, but the reality is that as he turns this into an idol, it just steals away his ability to be intimate with a real person in a real relationship, right? The other place we see it so clearly is in the way that we tend to objectify women. Our desire, our yearning for somebody's body is supposed to be a sacred, beautiful thing that draws us to that person and helps us to really get to know them and to want to cherish them and to know everything there is to know about them. And yet the reality is that when we twist it, when we tweak it, when we turn it into lust, then suddenly that person's body can just become a piece of meat. Individual parts of it can become a piece of meat that we want to dominate and control and use in our own minds for our own satisfaction and our own pleasure. And when that happens, it's just a matter of time before we start evaluating them as a piece of meat, as a commodity to be used instead of a precious child of God to be cherished. And so our young girls grow up with these impossibly unrealistic standards. As we create these fantasy-like, crazy ideas of what makes for a good looks or good body, a constantly shifting image, not just from culture to culture, but from year to year, even in our own country. We look at the difference in what we considered beautiful for faces and bodies in the 1950s with Marilyn Monroe, or the 60s with the Mad Men, the women of Mad Men, or the 70s with the Kate Moss waif type person, or today with J-Lo and Beyonce and the booty shakers and all of that. It's crazy how it changes, and each time it changes, we leave in our wake thousands of girls who starve their bodies and starve themselves trying to live up to an impossible image that they'll never be able to live up to, and the pain is immense. And so what can we do? What can we do about this tweaked love? This movement that happens all around us from beautiful, sacred, precious love and desire and yearning to something that's harmful to ourselves and the people around us. You know, even the girls who come close to those images, it's harmful for them as well, as they learn very quickly from so many forces around them that their real worth, the thing that really makes them valuable, is the way they look and the way that their body is right now and the things that they dress in and the poses that they take, and they learn how to open doors and how to make things work for them that way. Is it any surprise that some of the real knockouts from my high school graduating class now are the ones who seem most insecure, most filled with Botox, most worried about their image? So what can we do? Well, the first thing, and this is the same thing for all of these slightly irksome irritations, is that we can try to be brutally honest with ourselves. about where this issue of lust, this tweaked love, affects our lives, where we see it in our own perceptions, and where we see it around us, and where we see it in our loved ones, to be brutally honest with ourselves about the way that it's affecting our society and our lives and our own sense of how we love. The second thing that we can do is we can make a commitment to ourselves that we want our expression of our sexuality, of our desire and our yearnings to be sacramental, to be a sacred expression of giving to another. That we want everything about our sexuality to be about giving someone exactly what they need instead of taking for ourselves what we want. That it should always be about building someone else up and making them more than they are, than trying to satisfy something and take something for ourselves. What we should want is for our love and the expression of our desire and our sexuality to be in line with the kind of love that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels but don't have love, don't have this real kind of love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophetic powers, I understand all mysteries and all knowledge. If I have a faith that can move mountains, but I have not this kind of love, I am nothing. If I give away all that I possess and I hand over my body to the flames so that I may boast, but I don't have love, I gain nothing. This kind of love, this real love, is patient and it's kind. This kind of love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. This sort of love is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. This sort of love bears all things. It believes all things. It hopes all things and it endures all things. This kind of love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. But when I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. We can make a commitment that we desire our sexuality, our yearnings to be that kind, based in that kind of love. And the last thing we can do is we can set up boundaries for ourselves, to do things, to set in place certain parameters that make it easier to resist temptation. Billy Graham, I think, said, it's not the first look that gets you in trouble, it's the second and the third and the fourth. I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, 2012, Obama sang Al Green's song at the Apollo Theater. Do you remember that?
I'm so in love with you.
Do you think there has been anybody who has been the soundtrack to more lovemaking than Al Green? Do you think there are many more men in America who have had women throw themselves at them than this crooner who is everybody knows? I don't know if you know this, but over the years he's become not just a Christian, but Al Green is actually a pastor. He's Reverend Al Green. And he still goes out on tour and he still sings these songs, but he's taken some precautions. He's set up some things in his life so that so that he is able to resist some of the temptations that are out there. For starters, you know who his backup singers are? His daughters. Every time he goes out on tour, he brings his daughters as his backup singers. And the promoters are always willing to give them each individual rooms, but you know what? They always insist that they be in a suite together. He and his daughters stay together in a suite every time they go out on tour. That way, if some groupie knocks on the door in the middle of the night, one of his daughters answers and says, "May I help you?" We can figure out ways to set up boundaries so that we don't have to be corrupted by the things that happen when love and desire gets tweaked, becomes harmful to ourselves or to others. But the most important thing I think we need to remember is that God is in the business of healing the tears in our life. God forgives us and heals us from the hurts that we have inflicted upon us, the hurts that we give to others, the hurts that we give to ourselves. In the church, again, we get weird when we talk about sex. We have this way of making it seem like sexual issues are the only unforgivable sins, when the truth is that God and Jesus seem to have a special compassion for those who struggle with these kinds of sins. Jesus was always with prostitutes and the woman caught in the act of adultery and the woman at the well, and God forgiving David. I'm telling you, if God can forgive David for what he did, we are all well covered. It's time that we realize that sex is not the dirty, nasty thing that we're supposed to save for the one we love, but a beautiful, precious, sacred thing that we don't want to waste, that we don't want to allow to become tweaked or twisted into something that can hurt us or those around us. Because love never fails. Amen.